Mastering the art of counterpunching is one of the most effective ways to win in a fight in any combat sport, from boxing to... This video covers everything you need to know about counterpunching and explains how to set them up. It breaks down examples of counterpunching from a few fights. Before we start the video, let's find out what makes a good counterpunch. A good counterpunch is tricking your opponent to throw a punch and then dodging or blocking the punch and coming up with a counter. So let's start off by taking a look at the most common type of counterpunch, which is the slip counter. The slip encounter is the most common type of counterpunch in boxing. To keep it short, it is pressuring your opponent to throw a jab or a cross, then slipping and then coming up with a counterpunch. The best drill to master this type of counterpunch is partner drills, where you are up against a real person who will try to punch you and you should slip and throw a punch without hurting your opponent. Then you can try it out in light sparring sessions. Additionally, mitt work can also be very effective to improve at slipping and counter, because you have a target to hit after slipping and your coach can adjust it accordingly. Let's take an example of a perfect execution of the slip and counter by Canelo Alvarez. As you can see, Canelo's opponent throws a jab, then Canelo slips to the right side. He then uses that opportunity to throw a right hook before his opponent could get on guard. The reason why this is the perfect example is because Canelo knew that his opponent was going to throw a jab and had already planned to come up with a counter, and he did it very fast, so I had to slow down the video. If you know how to slip and counter together, you can win a lot of your fights, especially if you have good speed and punching power. The next common way to counter punch is the pull counter. The pull counter is basically pulling back from a jab or a cross and coming up with a counter quickly before your opponent can get his guard back up. Here's an example of Floyd Mayweather executing the perfect pull counter. As you can see in the video, Floyd leans forward slightly so his opponent would throw a jab. Once he throws the jab, Floyd pulls back and his opponent fails to land the jab. At last, Floyd comes up with a counterpunch with his right hand landing a clean shot. This was also used by Muhammad Ali very often, but most of his clips are recorded with low quality cameras. The only downside of this counterpunch is that it is risky, since there are times when your opponent can close in and punch you by the time you are pulling back. Now let's cover another way of counterpunching, which is very common. It is the Parry Encounter. As you can see, the guy with the gloves parry the mitts and then throws a counter. You can also throw a counterpunch with your other hand in many situations. Let's take an example of Floyd in the video where he uses his lead hand to parry a jab. When he does parry it, he comes up with a counter with his right hand. Another example of parrying a punch is the shoulder roll, which is also commonly used by Floyd Mayweather. As you can see in the video, Floyd uses his shoulder to parry or deflect a cross from his opponent. His opponent already made a mistake by not having one of his hands up, and Floyd used that opportunity to come up with a cross with his dominant hand. No matter what you think, Floyd was a master at counterpunching, so there are many things you can learn from his fights. The reason why this is very effective is because parrying punches can help change the trajectory of the punch and leave your opponent open for a short time period, and you can come up with a counterpunch in that time. The next common way to counterpunch is roll and counter. It was commonly used by Mike Tyson. Mike was well known for his head movement, and he was specifically good at rolling. Before I show the example, the best way to improve at rolling is making a slip line with boxing wraps and practicing rolling and throwing punches at the same time without touching the line. It is a very good drill, and then you can try it out while doing partner drills or sparring sessions. So here's an example of Mike Tyson executing a good roll and counter. As you can see, Tyson's opponent throws a jab. He then rolls under the jab and then comes up with a counter punch, and Tyson's power was more than capable of knocking him down. A reason why it worked very good for Tyson was because he was shorter compared to most heavyweights and had very good head movement with power. A good combination you can use for partner drills to improve rolling and punching is 1-2-3 roll and 3-2-3-2. It isn't the best for roll and counter, but can help improve rolling and coming up with a lead hook, which is commonly used. Here's another example of a perfect execution of the roll and counter. As you can see, Ryan throws a left hook and Tank rolls underneath the hook and comes up with a powerful shot which connects right on his face. Good accuracy and precision is something very useful to master in order to get better at counterpunching, which is something even Ryan admitted Tank is really good at. And some of the best ways to improve your accuracy are mitt work and training on the heavy bag while visualizing a target. Another way to counter a punch is blocking with your hands and coming up with a counter. Generally, if you use a high guard to block punches, it is likely that your opponent will try to pressure you and break your guard. And that is a very great opportunity to come up with a counter punch and potentially knock down your opponent. A great example is Crawford coming up with a counter punch when Spence failed to break the high guard and left himself completely open, which was a bad mistake since he was up against Crawford, who is very skilled. Even catch and counter falls under the same category and is often used. It is pretty simple and one of the first things taught to most beginners, which is catching a punch and then throwing a counter. Alright, that's pretty much it for the video.